That night at Camp Lejeune, the air was thick with humidity, the kind that clings to your skin and makes the night feel alive. The tall pine trees swayed gently in the breeze, their branches whispering secrets to the darkness. The moon hung low, casting long, eerie shadows across the dirt paths that wound through the camp. It was the kind of night where every sound felt sharper, every shadow a little too dark, and every silence stretched a little too long. Lance Corporal Jake Thornton had been stationed at Camp Lejeune for almost a year now, and he'd heard all the stories. Marines loved to talk, especially about things that couldn't be explained. Ghost stories were practically a tradition here, passed down through generations of soldiers who swore they had seen things in the woods, heard whispers when no one was around, felt eyes watching them from just beyond the tree line. But one story always stood out, one that even the most hardened guys didn't joke about. The girl who laughed at night. Man, if you ever hear a little girl laughing when you're out on patrol, don't stop. Don't look. Don't even breathe too loud. Just run. That's what Corporal Mendez had told him during his first week on base. The older Marine's tone had been dead serious, his usual cocky smirk nowhere in sight. I don't care how tough you think you are. If you hear her, you get the hell out of there. Jake had laughed it off at the time. It was probably just another ghost story meant to freak out the new guys. But tonight was different. The fire watch shift had started off uneventful. He and Private Miller had been assigned to a sector near the tree line, a quiet stretch of land where the only thing that ever moved was the occasional raccoon. They walked their patrol route in easy silence, their boots crunching softly against the dirt. The night was still, the kind of stillness that makes you notice your own breathing. Then, just as they reached the far end of their route, Jake heard it. Soft, distant giggle. He froze mid-step. The sound was faint but unmistakable, high-pitched, playful, like a child hiding just out of sight. He turned to Miller, expecting to see confusion or maybe even amusement on his face. But Miller wasn't smiling. He had gone pale, his hand gripping his rifle just a little too tightly. "You heard that, right?" Jake whispered. Miller swallowed hard, his eyes scanning the dark trees. "We need to go. Now." Jake frowned. "Come on, man. It's probably some kid from base screwing around." Miller didn't respond. He just turned and started walking back toward camp, faster than before. That's when the laugh came again, closer this time. Jake's stomach tightened. It wasn't normal. There were no kids out here. Not this late. Not in the middle of the woods. Then the giggle shifted. It was no longer coming from ahead of them. It was behind them. Then to their left. Then to their right. The same light, airy laugh moving impossibly fast. Miller broke into a run. "Move, Thornton." Jake didn't hesitate. He sprinted after Miller, his heart pounding in his chest. The laughter was everywhere now, circling them, growing louder, sharper. It wasn't just laughter anymore. There was something else beneath it, something wrong. A distortion, like a voice coming through a broken radio. Branches whipped against Jake's face as they crashed through the woods, the base lights barely visible in the distance. Miller was ahead of him, running like his life depended on it. Maybe it did. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the laughter stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Jake skidded to a stop, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Miller was frozen a few steps ahead, staring at something in the trees. "Don't look," Miller whispered. "Just keep walking." Jake's pulse hammered in his ears. He didn't want to look. Every instinct screamed at him not to. But his body betrayed him. His eyes drifted to the tree line. And there, just beyond the shadows, something moved. Jake's breath caught in his throat as his eyes adjusted to the darkness. Someone, stood just beyond the trees, barely visible through the shifting shadows. It wasn't moving, but he could feel it watching him. A shape too still, too silent, like it was waiting for something. The longer he stared, the more wrong it felt, like his mind was trying to convince him it was just a trick of the light. But it wasn't. Miller grabbed his arm, his fingers digging into Jake's sleeve. "I told you not to look," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Jake could hear the fear in his voice. The same guy who laughed off everything, who never backed down from a fight, was now shaking beside him. That scared Jake more than whatever was in the trees. "Come on," Miller urged, pulling him backward. "We need to move." Jake forced himself to turn away, his heart hammering against his ribs. He didn't want to take his eyes off whatever was there, but every instinct screamed at him to listen to Miller. They moved quickly, not quite running but not wasting any time either. The silence pressed against them, thick and unnatural, as if the whole forest was holding its breath. The laughter was gone now, but the absence of it felt even worse. After what felt like forever, the distant glow of the base lights finally came into view. Jake exhaled, his shoulders easing just a little. But Miller didn't slow down. If anything, he picked up the pace. Jake stole one last glance over his shoulder. Nothing. Just trees swaying in the wind. But the unease in his gut didn't fade. If anything, it only grew stronger. By the time they reached the barracks, Miller finally let go of his arm. He ran a hand through his short buzzed hair and let out a shaky breath. "You good?" Jake nodded, though he wasn't sure if it was true. What the hell was that? Miller didn't answer right away. He glanced around, making sure no one was close enough to hear. Then in a low voice he said, "I told you, man. You hear the girl laughing, you run. You don't ask questions." Jake frowned. "But what is it? A ghost? Some kind of—" "I don't know," Miller cut him off. His eyes were serious, tired. "And I don't want to know." Jake studied him for a moment. The guy wasn't messing with him. He wasn't trying to scare him or play a prank. He was genuinely shaken. After a beat, Miller sighed and leaned against the wall. "Look, all I know is that it's real. And whatever it is, it's been here a long time." Jake crossed his arms. "You've seen it before, haven't you?" Miller hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Not like tonight. But yeah, I've heard it. Once. A few months ago." He paused, his jaw tightening. Didn't sleep right for weeks after that. Jake wanted to ask more, but before he could, the door to the barracks swung open. A couple of guys stumbled in, laughing about something, completely unaware of the tension hanging in the air. Miller pushed off the wall. "Get some sleep, man. And if you ever hear that laugh again, don't stop to look." With that, he walked off, leaving Jake standing there, his mind racing. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the building, every rustle of the wind outside, made his skin crawl. He kept replaying the moment in his head. How the laughter had moved around them, how the air had felt wrong, how something had been standing in the trees, watching. By the time morning rolled around, he was exhausted. But the unease from the night before hadn't faded. If anything, it had settled deeper into his bones. The day went by in a blur of drills, training, and the usual routine. He tried to shake the feeling, to tell himself it was just some weird base legend meant to mess with the new guys. But every time he glanced at Miller, he saw the truth in his eyes. Later that evening, Jake found himself in the rec room, trying to distract himself with a game of pool. Few other guys were hanging around, talking, laughing like nothing was wrong. That's when he spotted Corporal Mendez sitting at a table near the back. The same guy who had warned him about the girl laughing on his first week here. Jake set his pool cue down and made his way over. "Hey, Corporal." Mendez looked up from his drink. "What's up, Thornton?" Jake hesitated, then pulled out a chair. "I think I heard her last night." For a second, Mendez didn't say anything. Then, slowly, he leaned forward. "Where?" "Near the tree line, out past the barracks." Mendez exhaled through his nose. "You see anything?" Jake hesitated. "Think so. Something was in the trees. But I couldn't make out what." Mendez nodded like that confirmed something. "You're lucky." Jake frowned. "Lucky?" The corporal leaned in. "'Cause you ran. Some guys don't." A chill ran down Jake's spine. "What happens if you don't?" Mendez studied him for a moment, then glanced around the room, making sure no one else was listening. There was a guy a few years back. Name was Stafford. He was on night watch near the same area you were. Heard the laugh. But he didn't run. Jake swallowed. What happened? Mendez's voice dropped lower. Nobody knows. He never made it back to the barracks. The next morning they found his rifle halfway buried in the dirt, like someone had tried to hide it. But no sign of him. Just gone. Jake felt his stomach tighten. And they never found him. Mendez shook his head. Not a trace. He leaned back, taking a sip from his drink. So yeah, Thornton. You're lucky. Jake didn't know what to say. His hands felt clammy, his throat dry. Mendez watched him for a second, then smirked slightly. You'll get used to it. Or you won't. Either way, don't go looking for answers you don't want. Jake nodded slowly, but he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just some ghost story. And whatever was out there in those woods, it was real. That night, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. Even after the barracks had gone quiet and most of the guys were asleep, his mind refused to rest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the shadow in the trees, felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing against him. Miller was in the bunk across from him, but he hadn't said much since their patrol. He just lay there, staring at the ceiling, arms folded behind his head. After a long stretch of silence, Jake finally whispered, "Hey, you awake?" Miller sighed. "Yeah." Jake hesitated, then sat up. "We can't be the only ones who've seen it, right? I mean, if this has been happening for years." Miller rolled onto his side, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You think command doesn't know?" Jake frowned. "So they do." Miller scoffed. "They pretend they don't. You think they want to admit there's something out there they can't explain. Some of the higher-ups tell guys to ignore it. Others act like it's nothing. But you don't hear them out there at night, do you?" Jake thought about that. He'd never seen an officer pulling night watch near the tree line. It was always lower ranks, fresh recruits, guys who wouldn't ask questions. Miller sat up slightly. "Look, man. You can try to figure it out, but that's how guys disappear. You saw Mendez. He didn't even want to talk about it. That's how you survive around here." Jake wanted to let it go, but something gnawed at him. Maybe it was the way Mendez had looked at him earlier, like he already knew Jake wasn't the kind of guy who could ignore something like this. Maybe it was the way Miller kept talking in half-truths, like he knew more than he was saying. Either way, Jake knew himself well enough to know one thing. He wasn't going to let it go. The next day he started asking around, carefully. He didn't want to come off like some paranoid recruit chasing ghost stories, but he also knew that guys talked. It didn't take long to figure out which ones had heard it before. Parker, a quiet guy from another squad, had heard the laugh his first week on base but never told anyone. He said he thought he was going crazy until someone else admitted they'd heard it too. Davis, an older Marine who had been stationed at Lejeune for years, refused to talk about it at all. When Jake pressed, Davis just shook his head and muttered, "It's not our business." But then there was Reyes. Reyes was different. He was the kind of guy who always had a story, always knew something he shouldn't. When Jake mentioned the laughter, Reyes didn't laugh it off or brush him aside. Instead, he just nodded like he'd been expecting someone to ask. "You want to know the real story?" Reyes said, lowering his voice. "Not just what the guys tell each other to freak out the newbies." Jake leaned in. "Yeah." Reyes glanced around before continuing. "There was a girl. A long time ago. Before any of us got here. Some say she was the daughter of an officer. Others say she was a local kid who got caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. But one night she disappeared. Just vanished into the woods." Jake felt a chill creep up his spine. "And," Reyes hesitated, "they searched for weeks. Dogs, helicopters, everything. But they never found her. Eventually they gave up. But that's when it started." Jake swallowed. "The laughing." Reyes nodded. "At first it was just rumors. A couple of guys on night watch swearing they heard something. Then it started getting worse. People reporting shadows moving where no one should be. seeing someone in the trees who wasn't supposed to be there. Then one night, one of the search team members went missing. Jake stiffened. Like Stafford. Reyes's expression darkened. Exactly like Stafford. And he wasn't the last. Jake exhaled slowly. This wasn't just some spooky legend Marines told each other for fun. There were patterns. People disappearing. Officers covering it up. A presence in the woods that had been there for years, maybe even decades. Before he could ask anything else, Reyes stood up. That's all I'm saying, man. You wanna mess with this? Be my guest. But if I were you, I'd drop it. Jake sat there, turning it over in his mind. Every instinct told him to listen, to do what everyone else did. Ignore it and move on. But then he thought about the laughter. The way it had surrounded them like it was toying with them. The way Miller had gone pale. The way something had been there in the trees, watching. And for better or worse, Jake knew he wasn't done. That night he made a plan. If this thing only showed itself at night, then that's when he needed to be out there. But he wasn't stupid, he wasn't going alone. He waited until the barracks had settled before nudging Miller's bunk. Hey! Miller groaned. Go to sleep, Thornton. Jake shook his head. I need you to come with me. Miller opened one eye. For what? I'm going back out there. Miller sat up, staring at him like he'd lost his mind. Are you insane? Maybe, Jake admitted. But I need to know. Miller ran a hand down his face, muttering a curse under his breath. This is the dumbest idea you've ever had. Jake grinned. So that's a yes. Miller let out a long, frustrated sigh. Then he got up. 15 minutes later, they were back at the edge of the tree line. The base lights flickered behind them, casting long shadows that barely reached the darkness ahead. The air was thick and heavy, the same eerie stillness hanging over the woods. Miller crossed his arms. All right, we're here. Now what? Jake swallowed, his pulse quickening. We wait. The silence stretched. Minutes passed, then more. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. Just the wind rustling through the trees. Then, just when Jake started to wonder if they'd made a mistake, a laugh came. Soft at first. Distant. Like a whisper carried on the wind. Jake felt every hair on his body stand on end. Then it came again. Closer. Playful. Miller's jaw clenched. We need to go. Jake didn't move. His feet felt rooted to the ground. Then the laugh changed. It was still a child's voice, but it was wrong. Too stretched. Too sharp. Like something was mimicking what a laugh should sound like. The air grew colder. The darkness around them seemed to shift. And then, a shadow moved between the trees. Not fast. Not darting. Just standing there. Waiting. Jake's heart pounded. This time it wasn't just a glimpse. It was real. He could see it. And it was looking right at them. Jake's breath came shallow. His pulse hammering in his ears. The shadow in the trees wasn't moving, but he could feel it. Watching. Waiting. The laughter had stopped, leaving behind a silence so heavy it pressed against his skin. Miller grabbed his arm, his grip like iron. Jake, he hissed. We have to go. Jake knew Miller was right. Every instinct screamed at him to turn and run. But his feet wouldn't move. His mind wouldn't let him look away. The figure stood just beyond the tree line, shrouded in darkness. It wasn't clear what it was, but there was something off about it. The shape was human, sort of, too tall, too thin. The edges of it seemed to blur, like it wasn't fully solid. Then it moved. Not a step. Not a lurch. Just a shift. Like the shadows themselves had folded around it. Jake sucked in a sharp breath. His body finally unlocked, and he stumbled backward. Miller was already pulling at him, dragging him away. Don't look back, Miller whispered. Just move. Jake forced his legs to work, pushing himself into motion. They jogged back toward the barracks, the distant base lights guiding them like a lifeline. Then behind them, the laugh, right at their backs. It was closer than before, too close. A cold breath on their necks. Miller cursed under his breath and broke into a full sprint. Jake followed, heart pounding, lungs burning. The barracks weren't far. They just had to make it inside. But then Jake heard something else. A step. Not theirs. Something else was running too. The laugh echoed again, shifting, distorting. It was no longer playful. It was hungry. The barracks door was just ahead. Miller yanked it open, shoving Jake inside before slamming it shut behind them. They stood there, panting, staring at the door as if expecting it to burst open at any second. Nothing. Silence. Jake took a shaky breath. Did you hear that? Miller shot him a glare. Are you kidding me? I heard it, I felt it, I damn near died from it. Jake pressed a hand against the wall to steady himself. His skin was ice cold, his shirt damp with sweat. Miller ran a hand over his face. I told you this was a bad idea. I told you not to go looking. Jake couldn't argue. He had never felt fear like that before. Pure, gut-wrenching terror. But the worst part. It wasn't over. Because just as Jake started to think they had escaped, he heard it again. A whisper. Right outside the door. A girl's voice, soft, almost amused. You didn't run fast enough. Miller went pale. Jake's stomach turned to ice. Neither of them moved. Neither of them breathed. The voice lingered for a second longer. Silence. Jake's hands were shaking. Tell me you heard that. Miller swallowed hard. I don't want to talk about it. For a long time they didn't move. Didn't speak. Eventually Miller exhaled. We're done with this, Jake. No more questions. No more searching. We stay inside at night. End of story. Jake wanted to agree. He should have agreed. But something about that voice, about the way it knew they had run, told him this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Jake barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard it. You didn't run fast enough. The words slithered through his mind, burrowing deep, making his skin crawl. He kept staring at the door, half expecting it to swing open on its own, but nothing happened. Eventually, exhaustion pulled him under, but even then, his dreams were restless. By morning, Miller acted like nothing had happened. He got dressed, went through roll call, and avoided looking at Jake altogether. But Jake knew better. The way Miller's hands shook when he tied his boots, the way his jaw was clenched just a little too tight. He was just as rattled. Jake wanted to talk about it to make sense of it, but he could already see the wall going up. Miller had made his decision. He was done. But Jake wasn't. The whisper outside the door had changed everything. It wasn't just some shadow in the woods anymore. It wasn't some distant, eerie laugh. It had followed them, knew them. And that meant it wasn't going away. Jake needed answers. And there was only one person left who might give them to him. That afternoon, he found Mendez by the motor pool, working on one of the Humvees. The guy had been quiet ever since the first night Jake mentioned the laughter, but now he looked worse, like he hadn't slept in days. Jake leaned against the truck. I know you've seen it. Mendez didn't look up. Not your business. It is now. Mendez tightened a bolt, jaw clenching. You should have left it alone. Jake crossed his arms. I didn't. And now whatever this is, it followed us. That got his attention. Mendez's hands stilled. Slowly he looked up. What do you mean, followed you? Jake hesitated, then told him everything. Laughter. The shadow. The whisper outside the barracks. Mendez listened, his face unreadable. But when Jake finished, Mendez let out a slow breath and wiped his hands on a rag. You screwed up, he said. Jake felt a chill. What do you mean? Mendez shook his head. It's not just some spirit, man. It's not just some ghost story. It's worse. Jake's stomach tightened. What is it? Mendez hesitated, then lowered his voice. Picks people. Not everyone. To some. Nobody knows why. Jake swallowed hard. And once it picks you. Mendez's eyes darkened. It doesn't stop. The words sent a ripple of cold through Jake's chest. Mendez leaned in. You said it spoke to you. Jake nodded. Mendez's face paled. Then it's already too late. Jake felt his pulse spike. What are you talking about? Mendez looked around, as if making sure no one else could hear. Then he whispered, it starts small. You hear it, you see it. But then, it wants something. Jake's throat went dry. What does it want? Mendez didn't answer right away. He just looked at Jake, his expression hollow like he'd already seen this play out before. Then he said, you. A heavy silence fell between them. Jake shook his head. Whoa. No, there has to be a way to stop it. Mendez exhaled. There's one thing. Jake's heart pounded. Tell me. Mendez hesitated. Then finally, run. Jake stared at him. That's it. That's your solution. Mendez's eyes were haunted. Not just run. Leave. Get off this base. Go home, transfer, whatever it takes. But don't stay. Jake wanted to argue, to push back, but deep down, he knew Mendez wasn't lying. The fear in his eyes was real. The weight in his voice was real. And that meant the thing in the woods was real too. But before Jake could say anything else, a sound stopped him cold. Laugh. Not far away. Not deep in the woods. Right behind him. Mendez's face drained of color. Jake's stomach lurched. Slowly he turned. Nothing was there. Just an empty row of Humvees. But Jake knew better. It was here. And it wasn't leaving. Jake's breath hitched in his throat as he stared at the empty space where the sound had come from. Mendez took a slow step back, his face drawn tight with fear. The laughter was gone now, but its presence still clung to the air like a thick fog, unseen but suffocating. Jake swallowed hard. Did you hear it? Mendez didn't answer. He didn't have to. His expression said it all. Something inside Jake snapped. He couldn't run forever. Whatever this thing was, it had chosen him, and if Mendez was right, there was no escaping it. Transferring wouldn't change anything. Running wouldn't change anything. It would follow. It would wait. It would take its time. Unless he ended it first. He clenched his fists, forcing his voice to stay steady. How do I stop it? Mendez shook his head. You don't. Jake's jaw tightened. There has to be a way. Mendez hesitated, then sighed, like he already knew Jake wouldn't back down. Nobody who's seen it has ever been able to make it stop, he admitted. But there's one thing I heard. A long time ago. Jake leaned in. What? Mendez's eyes flickered to the tree line in the distance. The same woods where this had all started. His voice was barely a whisper. You have to face it. Jake's stomach twisted. What does that mean? Mendez exhaled sharply. I don't know. No one does. Because the people who've tried. He paused. They don't come back. The words sat heavy between them. Jake had two choices. Wait for this thing to take him or confront it on his own terms. Deep down, he already knew what he had to do. That night he didn't sleep. He waited. He listened. And when the barracks were silent, when the world outside was still, he stepped out into the night. Miller had already passed out, dead to the world, but Mendez wasn't asleep. He didn't say anything as Jake left. He just watched like he knew this was the last time he'd see him. Jake walked toward the woods. The darkness swallowed him whole, and for a moment everything was quiet. Then the laughter started. It was soft at first, drifting between the trees, circling him, teasing him. His skin prickled, but he kept going. His footsteps crunched against the dirt, and the deeper he went, the louder it became. Then he saw it. The shadow was there, standing in the clearing ahead. It wasn't hiding anymore. It was waiting. Jake's pulse thundered in his ears, but he didn't stop. He stepped forward. The figure moved. Not closer, not away. Just shifting the way it had before, like it wasn't bound to the same rules of space and time. Jake forced himself to speak. What do you want? Silence. Then, in a voice that was both near and impossibly distant, it whispered, You came back. A chill ran through him. The figure took another step, and the moonlight hit it just enough for him to see what had been hidden before. It wasn't just a shadow. It had a face. And it looked just like him. Jake's breath caught in his throat. He was staring at himself, an eerie, twisted version, its features just slightly off, just wrong enough to make his skin crawl. It smiled. Jake's body locked up. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then the laughter came again, this time not from the figure but from everywhere. Surrounding him, inside him. The thing took another step. Jake felt the world tilt. His vision blurred. And then, darkness. When he woke up, he was lying in his bunk. The morning sun streamed through the window, casting long streaks of light across the floor. Miller was snoring in the next bed over, oblivious to everything. Jake sat up, heart hammering. Had it been a dream? A hallucination? Then he noticed something. His boots were covered in dirt. He had been in the woods. It had happened. He sucked in a shaky breath and swung his legs over the side of the bed. His whole body ached like he had been running for hours. And then he felt it. Wait. Presence. He turned to the small mirror above the sink. And there, in the reflection, standing just behind him, was himself, smiling. Jake's breath caught in his throat as he locked eyes with the reflection. The other version of himself stood behind him, the same uniform, the same posture, but not the same expression. The smile on its face was unnatural, too wide, too knowing. Jake didn't move. He didn't blink. Every nerve in his body screamed for him to run, but his feet were frozen to the floor. He watched as the reflection tilted its head slightly, like it was studying him. Then, in a voice that barely sounded like his own, it whispered, "You came back. And now, I stay." Jake spun around, his heart slamming against his ribs. Nothing was there. The room was empty. Miller was still snoring, the dull hum of the barracks filling the silence. But Jake knew what he had seen, what he had heard. He turned back to the mirror. His reflection was normal again. His own face stared back at him, but the unease lingered. His hands were shaking. He clenched them into fists, forcing himself to breathe. It wasn't real. Couldn't be real. But the dirt on his boots said otherwise. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Jake went through the motions, morning drills, chow, gear inspections, but everything felt off. The world around him seemed just a little too sharp, like he was seeing everything for the first time. The sounds of the bass were louder, the colors brighter, the air heavier. And then there were the looks. At first, Jake thought he was imagining it. But as the day went on, he noticed it more and more. People staring at him just a second too long. Like something about him wasn't quite right. Even Miller, who normally didn't care about anything, kept glancing at him like he was seeing a stranger. By the time evening rolled around, Jake felt like he was losing his mind. He needed to talk to Mendez. He found him in the rec room, sitting alone at a table, staring down at a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Jake sat across from him. "I saw it." Mendez didn't look up. "I know." Jake's stomach twisted. "What does that mean?" Mendez finally met his eyes. There was something in his expression Jake hadn't seen before. "Pity. You made it come back," Mendez said quietly. "It was waiting for you. And now," he exhaled. "Now it doesn't need to hide anymore." Jake's pulse spiked. "What are you saying?" Mendez leaned forward. "It's not about the laugh, man. It's not about the woods." His voice dropped lower, like he was afraid someone or something might be listening. "It's about you." Jake shook his head. "That doesn't make sense." Mendez's eyes darkened. "When you looked in the mirror this morning, did it feel different?" Jake's blood turned cold. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Mendez sighed. "It's not outside anymore, Jake." His voice was barely above a whisper. "It's in." Jake felt like the air had been knocked out of him. Oh, that wasn't possible. But deep down he knew. He had felt it. The shift. The wrongness. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "I can fight this." Mendez looked up at him, tired. "Can you?" Jake didn't respond. He turned and walked away. That night he avoided the mirror. He avoided his own reflection. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, willing himself to stay awake. But at some point exhaustion took him. And then, the laugh. It wasn't outside this time. It was in the room, right next to him. Jake's eyes flew open, his body locking up with pure terror. The room was dark, the only light coming from the hallway. But there was a shadow at the foot of his bed, standing, waiting. Jake couldn't move. His chest was tight, his breath shallow. The shadow didn't lunge, didn't attack, just stood there, watching. Then, slowly it stepped closer. And as the dim light hit its face, Jake's stomach dropped. It was him. Not a twisted version. Not a distorted shadow. Just him. Same face. Same uniform. Same cold, knowing eyes. And then, spoke. "You should have run." Jake felt the weight of those words settle deep in his bones. The thing smiled. Then it turned and walked toward the door. Jake sat up, his body finally breaking free from the paralysis. His heart pounded as he watched himself leave. And the moment the door clicked shut, he knew. He was still here. But he wasn't. Somewhere out there walking around talking, breathing was him. Or at least something that wore his face. And no one would ever know the difference. A chill ran through him. Because as he sat there, staring at the empty doorway, he realized something else. He didn't feel scared anymore. He felt nothing at all.